Good morning, church. How are we doing this morning? It's good to see everybody. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. It has been an honor to spend it with you guys, and thank you so much for having my wife here. It's been a great time to be with you. And you know, we had breakfast with the Gordons this morning, and my wife relayed a story that I think would be appropriate to share with you, given the fact that marriage requires so much grace, and that marriage thrives in the midst of grace. It means creating an atmosphere where there is a lot of grace. And so, when my wife and I, we'd gone to high school together. We were dating before we'd ever become Christians. We became Christians, and obviously everything had to change. And we'd been dating a year and a half. By the time we were Christians, you can imagine now dating as Christians, all the things that had to be different, And so for years in the campus ministry, we sought to be pure and to be righteous, to have people involved in our lives. It was wildly uncomfortable at so many moments, but it saved our relationship. But I can remember one summer, we both came from Indiana, so we would drive back to Indiana to be with our family, and for 1 week during the summertime, and then sometimes during the winter as well. And one of the times we went back during Christmas, I had been visiting with her and her family, and there was a snowstorm while I was visiting her family. And, they were like, well, I don't think you should drive home. And I was like, okay. And, but I knew that we were in dangerous territory at this point. And lo and behold, my wife and I messed up in our purity, and we weren't married. We were boyfriend and girlfriend at that point. And your mind goes to dumb places, like, it'll be fine. And then at some point in the evening, we both kind of like, what are we doing? What the heck are we doing? And so we stopped, and then the morning came, and I was like, oh my gosh, the phone calls I'm going to have to make now. And I called my campus minister, Tommy Alessi. I said, hey, Tommy, I messed up, and I'm confessing to him. And he's like, it's going to be okay, but you're going to have to call Tom. And Tom was the evangelist. And I was like, but why do I got to call Tom? And he's like, well, you're one of our family group leaders. I think he's got to know what's going on. And so, of course, I called Tom. You're just hoping for an answering machine. There's no voicemail. But you're just hoping for an answering machine. And, he picks up right away. And so I'm telling Tom what's going on, and I'm getting it all out. And he's like, all right, well, do you have a plan for the rest of your time there? And I was like, yeah. He's like, all right, well, don't mess up again. We'll talk when you get back. And it was that last phrase, we'll talk when you get back, that had me a little worried. And so we drove, when we drove home like through the night on a Saturday to get back on a Sunday, so that we could be there for service. And then there was a Bible Talk Leaders meeting. Those are the days where we had a Bible Talk Leaders meeting after every Sunday service. And I wasn't looking forward to any of it. I kind of snuck into service and tried to sit inconspicuously. And then, we go to the leaders meeting, and I just feel terrible. I'm like, what am I doing here? I don't deserve to be here. And and then Tom's getting up there, and he's kind of giving instructions for the week and everything. And then he goes, hey, I got an announcement to make as well. And I was like, and then he goes, I just want to share some good news. And I was like, and so I'm listening, and I was like, I don't want to hear any good news. I don't want to hear your good news. I just want to go home and wallow. And he goes, I just really want to share about a couple that I just feel like is outstanding and is doing so great. And I was like, I don't want to hear about any good couples right now. And he's like, they're just incredible leaders. They've got such a good relationship, so transparent. And he goes, I just really want to lift up Chris and Megan right now. And the first thing that went through my head is like, I think I confessed everything to him. Did he not understand what I was saying when I confessed it to him? And he completely did. And he used this moment to lift us up. And I was so bewildered and confused. But it was the first, most visceral moment I ever experienced of grace in my life, where both my wife and I fully received something that we did not deserve. And that story and that moment has informed so much of my life going forward. It's interesting living in Colorado. It's such a different climate than the Midwest, and there's 310 days of sunshine in Denver every single year. There's very little rain, maybe 14 inches of rain a year, although there's twice as much snow as Chicago, but it just all melts the next day because there's just so much sunshine. There's longer springs, longer autumns. In general, I just love the climate so much more than the Midwest. But growing things is it's a completely different, it's like warfare, trying to grow anything. The ground is clay. There isn't much moisture in the air. It takes a lot of irrigation to grow anything. In the Midwest, if you spill a seed on the ground, you're going to have like a garden the next day. I can remember my mom would always put out pumpkins in the fall and, as decoration. And I remember one fall, she's like, hey, before the next snowfall, I need you to clean out the pumpkins in the yard, because she had them all over the place as decorations. And, and I was like, because they were like rotting at this point. And, but I didn't do it. They were going out of town. I was supposed to do it by the time they got back. And I didn't do it, but the snow came and it kind of covered everything. And so you didn't know. And, in the Midwest, once it snows, that first snowflake, that's there until May, And so they never knew any different, And so the next spring, everything's gone. And, but in the front yard, all of a sudden, we're getting this weird grass in the front yard. And before you know it, we have inadvertently grown a pumpkin patch in the front yard because of those pumpkins. And my mom was like, you threw away those pumpkins, didn't you? I was like, yeah, Mom, I don't know what happened. It's a lot harder to grow things in Colorado. The moisture is different. The soil is different. The amount of sun is different. You have a mile less of atmosphere between us and the sun. So the sun is very intense. It scorches everything. Plants need, but the rules are still the same for growing anything. Plants need water, they need sun, they need soil. But because the environment is so different in Colorado, it doesn't grow the same way. It's harder to grow things. The environment affects everything, including the core principles of gardening. And it's the same idea as that I would like to talk about marriage for a second, because we need to make sure that we're fostering a good environment within our homes and within our lives for our marriages to really thrive. Mark chapter 4, verse 3 says this, listen, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on the rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, but because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seeds fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plant, so that they did not bear grain. Still other seed fell on good soil. It came up, grew, produced a crop, some multiplying 30, some 60, some 100 times. What's interesting about this story is that the seed, which represents the word of God in this case, the seed was the same in every single environment. But the environment was different. There's 4 different environments. And the seed could not take hold in the wrong environment. The environment that we create in our homes and within our marriages is huge and oftentimes determining factor to having an enduring, healthy, and fulfilling marriage. We've thought a lot about what are some important factors that have been important to our marriage, to having the type of marriage that we have. And certainly we have many things to grow in, but I think some of the most important factors for having a graceful environment begins with having a view towards the long game when it comes to marriage. No one in here married the perfect person, especially the person that married you. Over the long run, we all discover things that we love less about the person that we've married. The person we marry are discovering the same things that they love less about us. And over the long run, as we will all change, We will all grow, but it doesn't happen overnight. We took vows before God never to leave one another. Isn't that extraordinary? There is no circumstance in which we will leave one another. Those vows did not include a timetable for when we would change things. Some things may take a whole lifetime to change, and we all have to be okay with that. That was the agreement that we made, because we're going to be with one another until the end. So we all need to be okay with this long game when it comes to marriage. Listen, we all dislike being around someone that expects us to change quickly. You know, we might have had a parent like that. We might have had a coach or a mentor that was like that. And few people thrive in an environment of unrealistically high expectations constantly applied. Thus, we have to be careful not to do the same thing to our spouses in marriage. You know, while my wife would tell you that I was naturally charming as a teenager, even probably an incredible flirt, I suffered near crippling insecurity when actually inside of a relationship. And I hate my insecurities. I don't like to admit that I have them. I certainly don't like to talk about them. I always feel nauseous after they're exposed within me. Some people, they feel good when they get it out. I feel worse when I get it out. All right? It took me time to know how to behave and gain self-control and trust other people, including my wife, inside of a relationship. My wife and I, you know, when we started dating, we were, you know, long distance for a year and a half. And as I explained before, we didn't have the money for long distance calling, you know. And so we wrote letters, hundreds of letters to one another. And we have this, I don't know why my family had this, but they had this garbage can growing up, and it was a wicker frog. And you just threw garbage in it. But somehow I inherited this wicker garbage can, and we have put all of our letters in it. And so we have hundreds of letters in it. And it's painful to read what I wrote during that time. You know, I was so dramatic. You know, and I'm so wordy as it is, and as a teenager and as a young man, I was so flowery with my language, and everything was so important, and everything was critical in the end of the world, and the way that I described, you know, how much I loved my wife, while endearing, is also super painful for me, and then all throughout, I'm looking for validation. You know, I'm like, do you feel the same way? I'm not saying it like that. I'm being more subtle than that. But I'm saying things, and I want to know in return if it's reciprocated. And I always felt like I wanted the reciprocation to know that I was still okay within the relationship. I'm glad that she didn't have this unrealistic expectation for me to be secure overnight. It took time, and the lack of pressure for me to change was an important factor in me actually changing. Here's the thing, most people that have issues, they want to change. They're not sitting there like, I love being an angry person, you know? I love being an impatient person. That makes my life so much better to be impatient. Or anxiety, like, I love being anxious. It keeps me on my toes, you know? Keeps me sharp. Nobody wants these issues most of the time, okay? And so they want to change them. They want to change them probably more than anybody else. And pressure applied usually doesn't work. You have to keep the long game in mind to have the right type of marriage. You have to have grace, fostering patience, fostering time, because this stuff is going to change over a long time. And we're going to be together for a long time. We are building, all of us, a life together, all the way to the end. And it might take all the way to the end for some things to change. And here's the reality. If you're married, one of you is going to be holding the other person's hand when they breathe their last. We have to have a graceful environment all the way to that moment. You know, but the other part of fostering that environment is having a marriage that gets discipling. You know, it's amazing that when that statement gets made, there's some people that inwardly or outwardly roll their eyes at this. But I suppose for me, I've always had a pretty accurate view of how self-destructive my own personal tendencies are in life. So I'm somewhat surprised when other people don't think that they need other eyes on what's going on within their marriage. I've had to have consistent mentorship my entire life. I can't tell you how many times I've walked in to the Mitchell's home, the Singh's home, the Fink's home, the Kim's home, the people that have discipled us for the last 27 years, walked in the door and said, well, I hope you guys are ready for tonight. Because I've got some issues that we're going to have to talk through, and here's the thing, I'm always prepared to take my lumps. I know that no matter what happens, no matter how right I am, I did something wrong, all right? And I am prepared to take my lumps. I'm prepared to learn and to repent. I believe in marital arbitration. All right? I believe that when my wife and I can't see each other, can't see things on the same page, our next discipling time, I'm going in there going, okay, the Holy Spirit is going to speak through these people, and whatever they say, I'm submitting to, no matter how much I don't like it. And here's the thing, even looking back, if I could remember one of those pieces of advice being dumb, I am positive God blessed the humility of it. I am positive that God protects the humility of all of that. And it does something to the level of grace that I desire to show my wife, knowing that our marriage has some form of consistent accountability. When I know that in an argument, we're going to have a play-by-play of this to somebody else out loud, it's amazing how that regulates what comes out of my mouth. Because I don't want to repeat some things that I feel like saying. And there have been times where I've had to go, wow, I really said that. I did. I said that out loud. I said that to her. I love her, and I said that out loud, and I have to admit this to you now. And you know what? Does that make me feel ashamed? Absolutely. Absolutely it does. Is that shame bad? Not in that instance. Here's the thing, and that makes me think twice the next time I want to open my mouth and say something. And here's the thing. Developing a healthy marriage, there are so many books out there. There are so many great books out there. Now there's podcasts. I hate podcasts. A lot of people love podcasts. I don't like them, but if you like them, that's great. And there's some great information in those podcasts. You can learn a lot about, personal development and marriage and parenting and all of that. And it can give you incredible information. Google can give you incredible information. YouTube can give you incredible information, and that can be helpful, but that's not transformative. A transaction of information is not transformative. For that, you need a teacher. For that, you need Jesus. You need interaction. This means someone asking you questions and you responding to their questions. That means having people that know you. And here is something that you could do that might be mildly terrifying. And I challenge everybody here to do this. Ask the people that you think disciple you, okay? And that's an important distinction, because probably in this room, there's some, I would ask some of you who disciples you, you would give me a name, and then those people might be surprised that you said that. Okay? But how about this? Ask the people that you think disciple your marriage, and ask them if they believe that you go after transparent discipling in your relationship with them. Ask them if they believe that they can safely tell you what they think about what's going on. Do you invite input, or do you force people to kick down the door? Are you transparent? Is it easy for other people to ask you about your marriage? Those are important factors to having a consistent, graceful marriage environment. Because, man, I'll tell you what, it's hard not to be graceful when you know someone's going to ask you if you were graceful or not. And so I think discipling is a really important part to create in that environment. I think also, as individuals, all of us having a walk with God that gets discipling. This might seem obvious to some, but I can't tell you how often people demand help in their marriages without ever really attempting to be spiritual first. All right, it's silly to get advice on how to help your marriage if you aren't even urgent about getting input about your walk with God. You know, at some point when we were in Chicago and we were leading a region on the south side of Chicago, we just run into a season where there was just a lot of marriage problems going on in the region at the time, and it was getting kind of overwhelming. And so, you know, we had an elder couple, we had a couple of shepherding couples, ourselves, and, you know, there's usually 5 or 6 people that everybody wants to go to for marriage help, you know. And at one point we had to make an announcement, and we said, hey, listen, if you want marriage help, if you're going to talk to the elders, you're going to talk to us, there's a couple requirements before you ask us for any help, okay? Number 1, you have to consistently pray and read your Bible for 2 weeks straight. All right, so if you've not done that yet, don't ask us for help. All right, go to God for help first, okay? Secondly, you have to spend 2 weeks praying with your partner. If this is a marriage issue, then spend 2 straight weeks every day praying with your partner about your marriage. All right? And then thirdly, I want to know that you've already gotten consistent discipling before you go outside of that. And here's the thing. I don't expect a discipling partner to fix marriage issues. I expect a discipling partner to help you walk with Jesus. All right, very few of us are marriage therapists. I'm not a marriage therapist. I'm not a marriage counselor. All right, I can help you walk with the Lord. That's where I specialize, okay? But I'm not a therapist. But if you're not even trying to do that first, you trying to get help in your marriage probably is going to be a fruitless endeavor. It's nearly pointless to try and get lasting help for your marriage if you aren't consistent in your mentoring in your walk with God. One always follows from the other. I think also, you know, an environment where grace thrives is having a house of encouragement. Okay, now listen, in the Zillman house, sarcasm is our second language. All right, we've had many discussions around the dinner table where we have to say, hey, okay, before any more jokes, everybody's got to say 3 nice things about somebody else. You know, and this is, you know, everyone just kind of sighs, and, you know, you'll have one of the brothers say to Cora, I like your hair color, you know, and that's where we're starting out. But creating an environment where there is consistent encouragement is important to having a graceful ecosystem. It's stunning what people will say about their partner, especially when they aren't around. I'm not even sure that they know that they're showing contempt to their partner in the words they use. They likely believe it's no big deal. It's just them being real, all right? But that's not how I see it. I see it as a problem. And it's one, once again, of environment, especially considering what I know about the environment I desire to live within, the environment that I want to be a part of. My wife, who is extremely intelligent, is super opinionated, uber competent, and very vocal, all right, all of that, is the single greatest source of encouragement in my life. I mean, there are times where we're at a place like this, and you know how you're having dinner, and the men are having one conversation, and the women are having one conversation, and then you hear something. You know, you hear your name, you hear an incident, you know what I mean? And now you're having a conversation, and you're not really listening to you're trying to figure out what's going on over here, like what's being said over here. And 9 times out of 10, it is my wife saying something overwhelmingly encouraging about me and my character to somebody else's wife, all right? I know that she thinks well of me to other people. I believe she would never complain about me to people on any kind of whim. And the house that I live in is filled with encouragement as a result. My wife thinks I'm awesome, all right? Now here's the thing. I think I'm awesome. All right? Like, I don't have a lot of self-esteem issues, okay? But I can be plagued by doubts like anybody else. She dismisses those doubts all the time by the environment that she creates in the house. And her encouragement comes at a cost to her, okay? It costs something sometimes to encourage others. She has to willfully diminish the effects of the things that I do wrong in order to create an overwhelmingly encouraging environment. My arrogance, my harshness, my selfishness, how messy I am. And I am so messy, okay? And she has to forget all of that and just think about the good things about me when she encourages, all right? And that's not easy. Philippians 4, verse 8 is one of my favorite verses. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, and this is written to a church where there are relational issues happening. All right, there are two important women in the church who are not getting along, and it's hurting the rest of the group, all right? And so Paul says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true and whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. I flourish in this atmosphere as a father and as a husband, and I think anybody would. I think nearly everyone would flourish where they are being built up again and again and again, despite their known faults. It builds an expectation of grace, which in itself makes for a stable house, a house of honesty, a place where reciprocation is important. It's a place of peace. It's a place of vulnerability then. Now, if you haven't necessarily built an environment of encouragement and you want to start, it might feel strange at first. It could even be awkward at first. I remember my dad and I growing up, we didn't have the type of relationship where we said, I love you. And I knew my dad loved me. I mean, I didn't doubt that. It just wasn't something that we vocalized. And then I became a Christian. And I was like, okay, I should probably say this. And so I can remember my dad and I are hanging out, and, at the end of the night, I said, okay, Dad, I love you. And he was like, he didn't know what to do. He was like, are you okay? I was like, oh, it's fine. He's like, no. I mean, are you healthy-wise? You're doing okay? And I was like, yeah, Dad, I'm fine. I'm just saying I love you. And he's like, right, but is something wrong? It can be awkward at first when you start creating this environment. It might even feel forced or contrived in the beginning. Those are just your muscles shaking off the dust for not doing this in a while. Persevere. You're going to have to learn what it actually is to encourage and what it simply means to miss the mark. It takes a lot of practice to be a good encourager. But eventually, you get the hang of it. And lastly, I just think to create these gracious environments for a marriage, there has to be room for a lot of vulnerability. When I was young in the ministry, I was surrounded by some really, really talented ministers in Boston. And, when I moved to Boston to go in the ministry, my best friend from college, his name is Kevin Miller. We were roommates in college. And Kevin is he's charismatic, he's Italian, he's loud, he's funny. Everybody likes him immediately. He's an incredible communicator and speaker. He's very, very strong. I mean, he's mesmerizing, just to be honest with you. You know what I mean? And then another guy, Glenn Petruzzi, who's he was extremely good looking, Division I basketball player, also just super likable. Chip Mitchell is my boss and my mentor. And if you know Chip is everything. Chip can hang the moon. There's nobody who doesn't like Chip. Chip is extremely compelling in everything that he does, all right? So, and then there's me. All right, I'm with those three guys who everybody loves, and then there's me. So we would go places, and it would be like, oh, man, Boston, they got Chip, and they got Kevin, and they got Glenn, and there's some other guy there, too. And I was the other guy, Those guys were, they were great at speaking and all that. I was the guy that you used to get facilities, okay? If you needed someone picked up from the airport, I was your guy, because the other three were too stupid to do that. You know what I mean? They were too disorganized to do that. All right, and so, right away in the ministry, I wanted to do so many great things, but there's a lot of insecurity being around such talented people. And I remember at one point we took a trip to Montreal to do some sort of teen thing, and it was a lot of fun. We took an RV all the way there. It's a long story, but on the way back, we're kind of running late for church on the way back, and Chip's like, well, we need someone to take the RV back. And I was like, oh, jeez. And I knew he wasn't going to ask Kevin, and even less likely was he going to ask Glenn, And so he's like, Chris, can you take care of the RV? I was like, well, I'll probably miss church. I was supposed to do communion. He's like, well, we'll get someone else to do that. And I was like, okay, And so my wife and I are driving this RV back, during church, and we're both kind of quiet. And at some point, I was like, I don't know why we're taking this RV back. And she's like, I don't know either. I was like, honestly, babe, can I just say something? And she's like, yeah. I was like, I feel like we're the best ones. And she's like, I do too. I was like, we're awesome. Aren't we awesome? And she's like, we are awesome. I don't know why we're doing the RV job. And like that moment of just like vulnerable ambition, arrogance, all of that, you know what I mean? I knew I was going to get discipled in some way or another, but just to have someone to be absolutely real with, like, I actually think this. And she's like, I actually think this too. You know, and then you pray, and like, God, I think this is true, but we want to be humble. Just, we don't always want to be the RV people, you know? And in that moment, I knew that for the rest of my life, I had a place to voice my most honest, shameful, ludicrous, and sometimes maybe even insightful feelings and thoughts with someone who would not react, someone who would not punish, and someone who would not hold over me my attempt at vulnerability. As a result, I can't wait to talk to my wife. Like on this trip, like we just had a huge workshop in Denver. You know, all of the ministers from the Rocky Mountains were there. We went from that workshop to, it's so busy. You know what I mean? It's incredibly busy. But my wife and I were gonna drive to the airport together alone. We were gonna be on the plane alone together. We were gonna be able to talk. We weren't gonna be interrupted. I look so forward 30 years later to just being able to talk to my wife. I can't wait till we retire. I can't wait till we could just sit on a porch and talk, read books and talk, explore and just talk about how awesome we are, you know? We need to have security in our marriages. We have to have places to unload what is dark and to have people listen to us, believe in us, pray for us. You know, that environment is so conducive to having a gracious household for your marriage and also for your kids. You know, environments are delicate, actually. They can be poisoned very easily. They can be devastated by storms. You can destroy them by adding unwanted pests. There are a myriad of ways to damage an environment, but they can also be very resilient. I recently read an article about Chernobyl, and you know, Chernobyl has become for many scholars this pivot point of foreign affairs in the 1980s. But you know, Chernobyl was the site of the worst nuclear meltdown in the history of the world. It happened in 1986. The whole city is now abandoned. You know, we used to go to Kiev all the time because that was our mission field, and it's only 70 miles away from Kiev is Chernobyl. Many of the disciples in Kiev have cancer and get early onset cancer because they believe from the effects of Chernobyl still. Today, you know, no one lives there obviously, and there's a cordon around the entire place. It will be radioactive. They don't even know how long. It'll be thousands and thousands of years that this place will be radioactive. But you know what's amazing? After all the people have left, even though there was a nuclear meltdown, today plants strive in Chernobyl. Deer are more plentiful than they ever have been. Lynx have started to live in the old town. Bison roam free in Chernobyl. This disaster site has become the third largest nature reserve in all of Ukraine. You know, we can do a lot of damage to the environment within our marriage. There can be so much that we can destroy, and yet an environment can also recover. It's never beyond recovery. It needs patience, and it needs time to recover. More than anything, it needs grace to root out all the poisons and all the pests that damaged it in the first place. And then the marriage can become once again a place of refuge for beauty, for rest, and for fulfillment. Amen. Thank you very much.